And so that means that all the kiddos are going to be in here with us for worship and the sermon, except for the nursery age. That will still be open. And so just be prepared for that next week. And before we jump in, there are 2 tables out in the hallway today. I encourage you to stop by on your way out. One of them is from one of our missionaries who's in town. I would encourage you to go chat with him and hear a little bit about what he's getting to do. And then another one is for our Scotland team, which is going to be leaving in September. They're doing a bake sale. So snag some good little treats on your way out. They are fantastic, and it supports our mission trip. So that's all the announcements I have. If you don't know me, my name is Savannah Ugan. Thank you. I'm the community outreach pastor here at Riverstone. I've been on staff for a few years now, and recently also became Tom's assistant to help with his scheduling. So I kicked him out of town this week so I could sneak up here. Don't tell him I'm up here. Just kidding, he might be watching the live stream. Sorry, Tom. We have been in what we're calling a year of Jubilee this year as Riverstone Church, and it's based off of this Jewish tradition that you find in the Old Testament. But as a staff, all of last year, when we felt the Lord inviting our church into this, we prayed and talked a lot to create language around what we felt like that meant for us. And so today, I want to talk about our year of Jubilee, and specifically the practice and blessing of lingering. And so I think it's helpful for those of y'all who don't know what our language is around this year of Jubilee, and for those of y'all who have not been reviewing it lately. I just want to read it over us today. Let's see if I've got this on. Oh, I clicked the wrong way, I'm sorry. I think I'm still going the wrong way. There we go, all right. Year of Jubilee. This is the statement we have of what we're embracing this year for 2023. We believe that God has spoken a year of Jubilee over Riverstone Church. Christ has invited us to live our lives in the freedom that he has freely given us. Still, at times, we find ourselves slaves to schedules, incomplete ideas, normal routines, present habits, and past failures. As we have prayed about how to best steward this gift, we have learned that Year of Jubilee is an invitation into the freedom through placing our full trust in God. It's a time for the people of God to focus on resting and reprioritizing our lives. A year dedicated to relinquishing lives driven by self-effort. We believe God is inviting us to shift the pace of our lives to match his own and to trust him as we let the ground rest in celebration of all he has done. We want to become a people whose primary focus is on being with God and not just doing things for God. As we resist the pull of our culture to be busy and rushed, we believe that God will teach us the practice and blessing of lingering in his presence and being with his people. This is a season when God is asking us to intentionally lay down things that may or may not be picked back up. We want to give God the space to do what he wants. You're invited to join us in being obedient to the call of God, of journeying deeper into intimacy with him and each other as we let go to create space for the more that he has in store for us. So that's what we're talking about today. That's what Riverstone Church has been embracing this year. And now that we're halfway through the year, this is our little refresher, re-upper, let's get back into this together. And specifically that line that we want to practice, let God teach us the practice and blessing of lingering in his presence and being with his people. My goodness, there we go. All right, so the blessing of lingering. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about my experience. One of my favorite things of all time about Christianity and faith is the blessing of unhurried time with God. And that's been something I've been able to cultivate throughout my lifetime. I got saved when I was 3 years old. And throughout my life, I've begun to see how sweet it can be when we just get to rest in the presence of God, and how filling it can be, and how hopeful it can be, and how recentering it is when we get to spend unhurried time with God. Another blessing of lingering is the fellowship with believers, like we get to do this morning, and in small groups with one another, and just hanging out and being a part of each other's lives. There's nothing greater in my life or sweeter than when I go through difficult times and I get to see the people of God come around me to support me. And it's also a blessing to be able to do that for other people. So those are just 2 little hints of my favorite things when it comes to lingering with God that we get to receive from staying in his presence unhurried. The practice of lingering has been something that I've tried to cultivate throughout my lifetime, even though I didn't use a specific language for it. It's something that I think is really important. And for me, when I was thinking back over when lingering started in my walk with God, the first thing I thought of was my family time as a kid. We would do meditation together. And for 30 minutes every morning, we would sit in the living room and turn on some instrumental music, and we would just pick one verse and sometimes just a few words out of that verse and meditate on it. We would sing it, we would say it, we would write it, we would read it, we would pray it over and over again and just let the word of God sink into our spirits. And then at the end of the time that we had designated to meditate on the verse, we would get to share, anyone who wanted to, about what we felt like the Lord was teaching us. And so that was one of the early things that I started doing and practicing lingering with God that I still do to this day. And then I eventually graduated high school and went off to college. And when I was in college, I joined a campus ministry where every Tuesday morning at 7:30, even though that felt so early back then, we would have a corporate prayer meeting, and we called this 7:30 prayer. And so all of us would gather together for bare minimum an hour and a half on Tuesday mornings at 7:30, and we would worship and pray together. And it was a time set apart for God in the week where we could be unhurried and where we could be with one another completely unhurried, resting in his presence and coming before him and interceding for things that we wanted for our campus and for our ministry and for our lives. And that was a wonderful place where I started to learn the benefit of more corporate lingering in the presence of God. When I took this job, I was so excited to be a pastor, and I remember I was talking to my dad on the phone, and I was like, this is great. I'm going to pray all night and all day, and someone's going to pay me for it, and it's going to be sweet. And it turns out there's actually a lot of responsibility that comes with being a pastor. Nobody told you that. And so as I was talking to my dad, he was like, I know, that would be a great thing. He's also in ministry. But he also let me know how quickly emails and paperwork can pile up on your desk, and it is amazing the amount of emails and paperwork that can pile up on your desk in a day of ministry. And so he encouraged me and advised me to spend an hour each day set apart to just spend time with God and pray and worship. And so since I got this job, every day that I've been able to, either in my office with the door closed or corporately with some of our other staff and people who have come into the church, I like to spend an hour of my day in prayer, kind of as a sacrifice of first fruits to God to say, you know, I'm nothing without you in this job, and I'm going to do a really bad job if I don't depend on you in it. And so part of that practice for me since getting this job has been spending that hour a day consecrating it to him. And then finally, more recently, as I've been in this job for a while and kind of figured out the flow and the rhythm of it, I remember I was talking to my counselor who meets with me monthly for a kind of ministry maintenance session, and I was like, I am reading so much content and listening to so many podcasts people send me and so many sermons that when I get home, the last thing I want to do is study the Bible because I'm maxed out on input. But I'm so hungry for the presence of God, and I don't know what else to do. And that's when she encouraged me to just have coffee with God or tea in the evenings. And that's been another practice that's one of the highlights of my life. And lately it's been with my journal, but sometimes it's just sitting in my sunroom with my cup of coffee and being able to rest with him, not particularly asking for anything and not particularly learning anything, but just believing that God is with me and getting to receive the blessing of that. So lingering, when I'm talking about it, a great definition to be aware of is staying longer than necessary because of a reluctance to leave or a slow to end. And like I'm talking about, this is part discipline, it's part desire. It's a part blessing and part a practice that we have to incorporate and choose for our lives. And I could say for me that it started with my parents and the meditation that we did, or churches and ministries that I've been a part of and what they invited us into. I could say that it's just my personality because I like to believe in beautiful and frilly things, and God is the best of all of them. But ultimately, it began with God. And so while this is my testimony and my history with God, I know that it's available for every single person in this room because God is the one who initiates time with us. His word says that we love God because he loved us. And so I want you to recognize that wherever you're at in your walk with God, the practice and the blessing of lingering is for you. And especially if you call Riverstone Church your home, I believe that it is for you in this season because we believe as a staff that's what God has called us into and invited us to. I want to look at a passage in the Old Testament just for us to kind of put our feet on some scripture for this idea of lingering. And so if you'll read with me Exodus 16:11 through 21, The Israelites have been rescued from Egypt, and they've been walking in the wilderness for a while, and they are cranky, and it is getting on Moses' nerves. And that's kind of where we're coming in to this conversation between God and Moses. The Lord said to Moses, I have heard the grumbling of the Israelites. Tell them at twilight you will eat meat, and in the morning you will be filled with bread. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God. That evening quail came and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the dew was gone, thin flakes like frost on the ground appeared on the desert floor. When the Israelites saw it, they said to each other, What is it? For they did not know what it was. Moses said to them, It is the bread the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Everyone is to gather as much as they need. Take an omer, which is around 2 quarts for us, for each person you have in your tent. The Israelites did as they were told. Some gathered much, some little. And when they measured it by the omer, the one who had gathered too much did not have too much, and the one who gathered little did not have too little. Everyone had gathered just as much as they needed. Then Moses said to them, No one is to keep any of it until morning. However, some of them paid no attention to Moses. They kept part of it until morning, but it was full of maggots and began to smell. So Moses was angry with them. Each morning, everyone gathered as much as they needed, and when the sun grew hot, it melted away. When I read this passage, I think of daily bread, and we'll see in a little bit how this concept of daily bread ties into the New Testament as well. But if you're familiar with church language, you probably hear about daily bread a lot, and it comes from this passage. And to me, one of the number one themes I take from this passage and what daily bread is a dependency on God. And in order to really enjoy and embrace the practice and blessing of lingering, I think it starts with becoming aware of how dependent we are on God, how much we need him, and how much he desires us. And I recognize that for me, with my job being on staff at Riverstone Church, the cost really is not that high for me to embrace Year of Jubilee. My job is actually to do my best to embrace this invitation and to lead others into it as well. I don't have kids with extracurriculars to consider. I have a dog who doesn't really do much. He's elderly. And then I don't have a 9 to 5 that I have to go to where some other boss is expecting some other project from me or maybe asking me to work overtime. I have this job and I have you people and I love it. But I recognize for you guys, for many of you in this room, it's very different and the cost is really high for you. And so I want to say with compassion and with honesty and with grace that I understand it's not easy to drop everything that you're doing and just go spend uninterrupted time with God. And I don't expect that of you. But very clearly, I want to say to you that I believe the invitation for all of us is that we can linger with God as his temple, as his people, wherever we are and whatever we do. And I want you to be convinced when you walk out of this room that that is available and possible for you, because I believe that's what God said in his word, and I believe that's what he has for Riverstone Church this year. And so when we think about daily bread and dependency on God, I think about having a healthy appetite for God. And just a little history on me. I have a degree in human development and family sciences, and then I did a little stint in marriage and family therapy. And so my whole worldview is very informed by social scientists, counseling, therapy, that world of things. And when I think about appetites, I think about the clients that we worked with and the chapters that we studied on 2 major eating disorders, the first of which is anorexia. And you're probably familiar with this eating disorder. Physically, what it does is you start to lose your appetite because of trauma or grief or self-hatred or a number of things. Your appetite decreases. And then when you go to eat, you have no appetite, so you're not eating enough. You're not getting the nutrients you need. You start to lose weight, and then your stomach over time begins to shrink, and you get stuck in this vicious cycle of not having an appetite and not being able to feed yourself and not getting the nutrition you need. And then the next time you go to eat, you have less of an appetite because your stomach is shrinking. And I think spiritually, there's a very considerable parallel between anorexia in our flesh and anorexia in our spirit. I think that many times we can come into church or small groups or approach our quiet time and we're not really feeling it. Our heart's not really there. We don't have the desire, even though we're maintaining the discipline. and we just sit, and it just like almost goes past us. Like you may have been in a church service and you just walk away feeling empty still, or you go to pray and you don't hear God respond to your cries, and so you walk away feeling empty again. And so then the next time, when next Sunday rolls around, or the next small group runs around, or it's time for you to pray again, you're like, I don't even really have an appetite to do this anymore. And you get stuck spiritually in this vicious cycle where you know that you should be eating and you know that you need God to sustain you, and you just can't quite get your heart in that place. And this is one of the things I feel like the Lord wants to free people in here from today. Another common eating disorder you've probably heard of is bulimia. And this is a pattern of binging on food and then purging the food that you've eaten. And I think spiritually there's another parallel that we can see where sometimes we go all in and we start listening to podcasts and reading the Bible and going to every church event that we can. You get full of like almost this hype of like, I am there for God doing everything, and it's amazing. And then like because of how big it is and how full you get, you can just go months after that. Maybe not months, maybe it's weeks, maybe it's days. But you just go time without actually desiring to be in the presence of God again, because you're riding that high from the last thing that you did with God. And I believe that a healthy spiritual appetite is one where we have the hunger for God and we come and trust him to fill it, and he fills it for us. And then the very next day, the very next moment, we come back to him to start it all over again, because he's that good and he knows what we need and he knows how to sustain us. I want to look at a New Testament. It's a beautiful parallel to Exodus, which I just love to see that in the Bible when the Old Testament and the New Testament complement each other. In this passage, Jesus is talking, and so we get to hear the words from his very mouth written into his word, John 6:27 through 37. Do not work for food that spoils, but for food that endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you. For on him, God the Father has placed his seal of approval. They asked him, what must we do to do the works God requires? Jesus answered, the work of God is this, to believe in the one he has sent. So they asked him, what sign then will you give that we may see it and believe you? What will you do? Our ancestors ate the manna in the wilderness. Look at that. As it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat. Jesus said to them, very truly I tell you, it is not Moses who has given you the bread from heaven, but it is my Father who gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is the bread that comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. Sir, they said, always give us this bread. Then Jesus declared, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. But as I told you, you have seen me, and still you do not believe. All those the Father gives me will come to me, and whoever comes to me, I will never drive away. That passage to me is so beautiful. I wish I could just stand up here and read the Bible to you all morning. I think there's so much meat in it that we could take for Year of Jubilee. Like, don't work for food that spoils, or having this attitude of always give us this bread. But ultimately, I think the big part is Jesus saying that I am the bread of life. And if you come to me hungry, I'm not going to turn you away. And so the blessing of lingering for all of us this morning, I believe, is that we can stay in the presence of God to be filled. If you are hungry for God, if you are hungry for something that is not satisfied, I believe with my whole heart that that satisfaction is found in God, and the nurturing that you need and the sustenance that you need is found in God. I believe another blessing of lingering with God and with his people is staying to rest. In Matthew 11:28, he said, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. If you in your life, considering the cost of accepting lingering and stepping into this year of Jubilee, feel burnt out and exhausted and like this is something that's impossible, the word of God for you this morning is Matthew 11:28, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. And so I want you to leave confident in that foundation of his truth. My personal favorite blessing of lingering is staying to be loved. And we see in John 15:9, as the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Now remain in my love. And I think all of John 15, as he talks about abiding and God being the vine and us being the branches, really has to do with lingering and just resting in his presence to receive his love. And it's in John 15 where he says, this is how your joy is made complete. And so I want to be very clear. I might be sounding a tad like I'm preaching. You can be like perfectly happy and have the keys to success if you just take a little extra time for God. And that is not the message that I want you to walk out with here today. The message that I want you to walk out with here today is that there is joy in the presence of God, and it is available to you because you are His. You are the branch, and you are a temple of God. He rests in you, Christ in you, the hope of glory. And so there is joy for you, and there is peace for you in His presence and with His people. I want to read to you guys this beautiful commentary. It's one of me and my dad's favorites, and it's on a psalm by Alexander McLaren. I'm going to forewarn you that he is about as dense as A.W. Tozer and then as poetic in his writing as C.S. Lewis. So we're not trying to tease this apart and understand all of it this morning. I actually just want to read it over you guys today, almost as a piece of poetry that I feel like really encapsulates the heart of this message this morning. And so you can just take a deep breath and enjoy this commentary by Alexander McLaren as we wrap up. Let us take care, brethren, that we give our hearts to be influenced and awed and ennobled and tranquilized by the sense of evermore being in the house of the Lord. Let us see to it that we keep in that house by continual aspiration, cherishing in our hearts the ways that lead to it, and so making all life worship, in every place what the pilgrim found the stone of Bethel to be, a house of God and a gate of heaven. For everywhere, to the eye that sees the things that are, and not only the things that seem, and to the heart that feels the unseen presence of the one reality, God Himself. All places are temples, and all work may be beholding His beauty and inquiring in His sanctuary. And everywhere, though our heads rest upon a stone, and there be night and solitude around us, and doubt and darkness in front of us, and danger and terror behind us, and weakness within us, as was the case with Jacob, there will be a ladder with its foot at our side and its top in the heavens, and above the top of it His face, which when we see it look down upon us, makes all places and circumstances good and sweet. So we're going to go into a time of ministry. I want to invite our ministry teams to come on up. There's a few things that I wanted to focus on this morning as we go back into worship to close the service. First, if you need peace and rest, if you've heard some of these things I've been sharing and it's something that you want, I invite you to come up and receive prayer from our prayer teams. I really don't think that there's anything magical about the altar, but I do know that there is something miraculous about two or more people gathering together and asking in the name of the Father. And so we want to partner with you and pray for you in that if you need it. If you have been thinking about the cost of what it's going to take for you to fully embrace this year of Jubilee halfway through the year, or if there are things that just came onto your plate that feel scary to let go of and to lose, we also want to pray with you this morning. And finally, if you don't know the love of God like this, like the way that His word speaks about Him and the way that we feel like He wants to reveal Himself this year of Jubilee, we invite you to come up and to receive prayer. But if you choose to stay in your seats, I just want to encourage you to focus on being with God and take a moment to just breathe and rest in His presence. I'll be up in just a moment to close us back out.